God was preparing him all of this time to fight Goliath. His training, David was trained through the hard knocks of life. And that's what I want to let you know. Sometimes you may be thinking, okay, the things that I'm going through in my life, like what is the point of all this? But sometimes the things that you're going through in your life, some of the hard things that you experience, sometimes those things are preparing you for a bigger battle later on. I know you've heard the saying, it's not about how you start, but how you finish. And that's a good phrase, and a lot of times it's true, but sometimes it's not true. It is a good phrase in general terms, but it's not always true. And what I'm saying is, sometimes it does matter how you start. It makes a difference. I'm saying that how you start can make all the difference for how you finish. But here's the thing. The kind of start that I'm talking about is not always recognized. Like, we don't always recognize this start, because the kind of start I'm talking about is not necessarily when you start a specific thing, or you start a specific project, or you start a specific job or a specific relationship. I'm talking about the whole thing. It could be something that you started. It could be a job that you started a long time ago, and you started this job a long time ago, and then now that job affects how you finish a different job. Or you started, and this can go all the way back to your childhood. How you grew up, how you started your life can affect how you finish something later in your life, right? Something when you get older. And so that's what I'm talking about, that we don't always recognize that things start, when they start. And sometimes we take for granted what we're doing in the moment because we think that whatever we're doing has no bearing on what we'll do in the future. Like, this happens a lot when people are young. We think that early on, when we're a child, or even in our, teenage years or in our early 20s, we think that what we do in our early 20s doesn't affect what we do in our 40s. But it absolutely affects what we do later on. Everything in your life is all connected in some kind of way. I'm a firm believer. I don't think that things that happen in our life, I don't think that things happen in isolation. Like, I don't think that no events or no relationship that you have or no job that you did or no certain situations, I don't think any situation in your life is isolated and it has nothing to do with something else later on in your life. I think all things are isolated. All things are connected. And it may not seem like it. You may not notice it now, but it is connected. That's why you need to watch whatever you're doing. You need to watch what you're doing because this could affect you later on. You know what I mean? Watch how you spending your money, because right now, you spending your money, you're young and you trying to live it up, but you don't know how it's going to affect you in retirement. And so that's what I mean by recognizing your start. And, because the start, whatever you're starting, yes, you may not see the fruit of whatever you're doing right now until later on. And so that's what I'm talking about today. Now, I know you might be thinking about stuff that happened in your childhood, and if you had a rough start, and you experienced certain things, or the odds were stacked against you, this is your start. This is what I mean by this is your start. But I believe that no matter how hard it was for you, no matter how rough you had it when you were growing up, no matter how dysfunctional your family was, that God still has a plan for everything that happens in your life. And He's not surprised by anything that happened to you in your life. God is not surprised. And so you don't have to sit around and feel sorry for yourself or feel bad about how your life went, because God is not surprised by that. He is not surprised at all. And as a matter of fact, God can turn anything around. He can take your situation and turn it around for your good. He can take a bad start and make it a good finish. And so it doesn't matter if the odds were stacked against you, God can make it all good. You see, we've all had something significant that happened in our lives. You may be thinking, well, I had a pretty good childhood. I had a pretty good childhood. I didn't have too much dysfunction, or at least you didn't think it was dysfunction in your childhood. You probably had parents that stayed together. You know what I mean? You probably had money. Your parents probably had money, and so you had everything that you wanted and everything that you needed. And so you probably don't look at it, you was always, you never went hungry, you never had your lights turned off or nothing like that. Your parents bought you, Jordans all the time or whatever, you wanted. They bought you the latest fashion. They always bought you the newest PlayStation or Xbox or whatever. And you're probably thinking, I didn't have anything like that in my childhood. And that's great. That's wonderful. I'm happy about that. But I believe that, but if you keep living, because I believe that we've all had something significant that happened in our lives. And if you had a great childhood, but in your adult life, you've had some things happen to you. And I believe, we've all had some significant things that happen to us in our life. Something that sets the foundation for the purpose of your life. Because sometimes your purpose is born out of what happened to you or the things that you experience. And so some of us experience things, like I said, early in life, and then others, we experience it later. But your start is your start. Whenever it started for you, that's your start. And I like to say that is your start. That's where life begins. Because I said this in one of my other videos, that I truly believe that life does not truly begin until you have a major experience. And yes, normally it's a failure. But the reason why I say it's a failure, because I don't look at failure like anybody else will look at it. I look at failure as like, okay, this is an opportunity to learn something. And I don't think you can learn when everything is going well, everything is so successful. I don't think you learn on the mountaintop. I think all of the learning happens when you're in the valley. And so that's why I like to say that life truly does not begin until you have a major disappointment, until you have a major setback, until you have a major failure in your life. That's when life truly begins. I don't think, again, I said this in my last video, I don't think that you even really know who you are as a person until you have a major setback in your life. The reason why is because when you have a major setback, when you're in a valley, when you're sometimes even in depression, or when you're discouraged, or you just feel, when you're grieving, when you're hurting, you tend to do more introspection. Like, we really don't do any introspection on our lives when things are going well. We don't check and say, okay, why? Normally, this is what we don't do. We do not, when all things are going well in our lives, we don't sit around and say, okay, why are these things going well? I mean, we might know that, okay, things are going well because I got a good job, or things are going well because I got a good wife or a good husband. You may be thinking, oh, I live in a good neighborhood. Okay, but really, why are things going well? Why do you have all those things? Why? No, we don't do that. We don't do that in general. And I think that we should do that, but we don't do that. But the thing that we do is we start to think about our lives and who we are and why things are going bad. So that's when we learn the most, because we're more focused and in tune with what's going on in our lives. We're more focused and in tune. We're more focused and in tune on what's going on within ourselves when we are in the valley, when we are discouraged. Then that's when we are really paying attention. You know what I mean? And there's a saying that says that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And sometimes what makes the student ready is being in the valley, is a hard time, is going through something difficult that knocks you off your feet, something that knocks you on your butt. And that's when you start paying attention. Like, okay, I got to pay attention now, because life just, put me down, and I really got to pay attention because I don't want to experience this again. And see, that's like, whether you believe in this or not, like when when you whoop a child, when you spank a child, that form of punishment and just correction in general, correction makes you think about, okay, how do I not do this again? And so that's what I mean by, you don't really know who you are, and life doesn't truly begin until you have a setback that makes you listen and makes you pay attention to what's going on around you, makes you pay attention to what's going on within inside of you. And it makes you learn a lot about yourself and learn a lot about life and what to do next, and how to how you should approach this thing next. And it gives you wisdom for how to proceed with anything that you do in the future. And so that's why I say that life doesn't start until the end. And so, like I said, your start is your start. Sometimes your start happens early in life, and sometimes it happens later in life. And but this is the thing. No matter what happens to you, I want you to know that you can still do great things. You can still do great things no matter what happens to you. You can still do great things. And that's why I want to share a little bit of David's story. David in the Bible, I want to share a little bit of his story with you because it's a story of how God used an unlikely person to do great things. Now, we know that David ended up becoming king. He was King David. He ended up becoming king, but that's not how it started. It didn't start off like that. And so I want to take some time to talk a little bit about how he started. like I said, I want to tell you a little bit about David, and you probably know David's story. David killed Goliath. We know the story, right? And so I want to tell you a little bit about that, about how before he killed him. David was the youngest son of his father. Now his father had his brother. He had brothers, and so David was the youngest son. David's job was to tend to the sheep. David was a shepherd boy. Okay. And you know the story of, like I said, the story of him killing Goliath and all of that. But David was a shepherd boy, and he was the least of his brothers. He was the youngest of his brothers. He had all these brothers, and they were older and supposedly tougher and all of this type of stuff. And David was like the last person that everybody would have thought that would have killed Goliath. Why? Because he was a shepherd boy, and he was the youngest of his brothers, and all of his brothers were in the army. All of his brothers was in the Israel army. Okay, and again, David was just a little shepherd boy, while his older brothers were all soldiers fighting in the army. But David had a foundation. He had a foundation that nobody knew about. He probably didn't know about how important his foundation was. He didn't even know the impact of his foundation. David had a foundation. Like I said, his start was before he knew it was his start. And so David went through some things in his life that actually prepared him to fight the giant Goliath. Now, I don't think he realized how much God was preparing him for that moment, but God was preparing David for this moment. All the things that David went through, God was preparing for it. And we just get a snapshot of some of those things in the scripture. And I want you to know, just like David, God may be preparing you for something that's going to happen with you. He may be preparing you for something. God may be preparing you for your future. He may be preparing you to kill your giant, whatever your giant is in your life. He's preparing you for something. I don't know what your giant is, but I do believe that God is preparing you for it. And like I said, it's all about how you start, because it does matter how you start. You may not feel like you deserve greatness, but guess what? God has chosen you to be great. You might be sad, you might be broken, you might be discouraged, you might be confused. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because God can still use you. He can still use you no matter what they said about you, no matter what you look like, no matter what you did, no matter how small you feel. God can still use you, and he can turn everything around regardless of what happened to you. So don't be ashamed of how you started and what you went through, because God will use all of everything that you went through to get you to where you need to be. And so let me take you to what I want to take you to. 1 Samuel. A little bit of David's story is in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 32 through 37. So 1 Samuel 17, 32 through 37. So verse 32, it says, this is what it says. Don't worry, this is David. Now this is, let me give you a little context before I say all this. So David was, like I said, his brothers was in the army, and David was a shepherd boy. So his father told David, one day he told him, he said, hey son, what I want you to do is I want you to take he took some food. He said, I want you to take this loaf of bread and this cheese and this food. I want you to take it down to your brothers in the army and give them some food, give them some lunch. And while you're down there, I want you to ask your brothers how they're doing. See how they're making it. See how they're doing. See how everything's going with your brothers. And so David did that. David left the sheep with someone else, and he set out and he took the food to the army, and then he tried to go see how his brothers were doing, and his brothers. So the army was down there fighting against the Philistines, and that's where Goliath was there every day. He was pretty much punking the army. Goliath was punking them. He was just standing there and said, somebody come out here and fight me. And they were scared. They was all scared of Goliath. And so that's the context of this story. So this is right when David goes down there. So and then David. So what happened was David went down there and he heard Goliath talking junk, talking all this noise, and everybody's scared. And then so David was like, okay, what's going on here? What is he saying? And then so they told David, the king said if anybody is able to fight Goliath, he will be able to marry Saul's daughter, and his family will be exempt from taxes. And so David said, okay, well, I'll go fight him, And so David was like, y'all sitting around here scared. I'll go fight him. You know what I mean? And so this is where we pick up in the story. So he said that, and then they told Saul that David said he'll fight him. And so word got back to Saul, and so Saul called for David. Saul called for David, and David went to Saul. And then this is what David said to Saul. David said, don't worry about this Philistine. David told Saul, I'll go fight him. And then Saul said, don't be ridiculous. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You are only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth. But David persisted. David said, I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. I have done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too. For he has defied the armies of the living God. Then the Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. And so Saul said, all right, well, go ahead. May the Lord be with you. And so let's break that down. David was confident. He was confident, and David had no idea that he was going to go down there and fight Goliath that day. He had no clue. He was doing what his father told him to do, taking some lunch to his brothers. That's all he was doing. So he had no idea. But when he heard Goliath talking all this noise, he was like, wait a minute. I'll fight him. I'm not going to sit here and be scared like y'all, because the whole army was scared. Even Saul, the king, was scared. But David was like, I ain't scared. I'll fight him. Let me get him. Let me at him. And so David was confident, and David showed way more courage than anybody else. And so when when he was saying that, when David was saying that, they was like, okay, they told Saul about it. And so David said, look, I'll fight him. And so just, hearing David saying this, when Saul thought he was joking, Saul was like, you got to be kidding me. You can't fight. That's a grown man. You can't fight this dude, because you're just a little shepherd boy. And so that just seemed ridiculous to Saul that David wanted to fight him. He's like, you just a little boy. And first of all, this is a grown man, and he a giant. You know what I'm saying? And so, but look, David was like, look, don't worry. I'll go take care of him. I'll go fight him. And so those are some bold words. Because before that, he ain't never fought no giant. He's never fought a giant before. But David actually was prepared to fight Goliath. See, David was trained the reason why he was an unlikely person to fight Goliath is because he was not in the army. His brothers were in the army. So we would have thought that this story, we should be talking about his brothers, like how one of his brothers took out Goliath. But that wasn't the case, because his brothers were scared just like the rest of the army. So we're not talking about any of his brothers. We're talking about David, because David is the only one that had the courage to go fight him. And so David, but we just don't realize, again, like I said, we don't realize that David was actually being trained and prepared. God was preparing him all of this time to fight Goliath. His training, David was trained through the hard knocks of life. And that's what I want to let you know. Sometimes you may be thinking, okay, the things that I'm going through in my life, what is the point of all this? But sometimes the things that you're going through in your life, some of the hard things that you experience, sometimes those things are preparing you for a bigger battle later on. And so David was like, let me fight him and everything. And Saul was like, look, don't be ridiculous. Ain't no way you can win this fight against that giant, because you just a little boy and he a giant. Ain't no way. And see, Saul thought that David was disqualified because of his age, because of his size, and because he didn't have no experience. Like I said, he was not in the army. He was a shepherd boy. But that just shows you about how some people look at things. See, they look at it from natural point of view. But see, any of us who knows God and believes in God and lives our life lives a spirit-led life and trusts God and believes that God will give you all you need to do anything, that if we trust that we can do all things through Christ who strengthened us, other people, they may look at things through a natural perspective and say, you can't do that. You can't do this. You're not qualified for this job. You ain't got no degree. You can't, you know what I'm saying? And other people look at that. But and God knows that that it don't matter if you ain't got no degree. You still qualified. You qualified because God said you qualified, because you got favor with God and with man. And so Saul is just looking at it from a natural point of view. But David, he's looking at it from a supernatural point of view. David knows who his God is. You know what I mean? And so, like I said, the Bible says man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. And so David knows what he has on the inside of him. He knows he's got God with him. And David has faith. And so we looking at David and say, okay, ain't no way David can win. There's no way David can win. But David is looking at it like, look, ain't no way I can lose because I got God on my side. And that's what you got to know, man. You got to know that when life is coming against you, or when people are coming against you and saying there's no way you can win, there's no way you can do this, there's no way you can get this job, there's no way you can buy a house, there's no way you can do this, you got to know and trust and believe that with God, yes, you can do that. You can buy that house. You can get that job without a degree. You can do these things. And so you got to know that. You got to trust that. You got to trust what God says about you before you trust about what everybody else is saying. And so, he's saying, you a boy and this is a man. But David knew who he was. And you got to be like David. You got to know who you are regardless of what they're saying. You got to know who you are. And you got to know who you have in you. Because greater is he that is in you that is he that is in the world. And so you got to know that, because other people might not know that. And they're not going to have your best interest in heart. So you got to know who you are. You got to know that you're capable. You got to know that you're qualified, because other people think that you're disqualified. But if you know on the inside that you're qualified, you can move out and take hold of the things that God wants to give you. And so Saul said, okay, all right, since you say you want to fight him, okay, how do you think you're going to win? And so David told him, look, let me tell you something, man. I know I'm not in the army. I know I never had any army training or nothing like that. But let me tell you what, let me give you my resume. David said, let me give you my resume. He said, I have killed both lions and bears. Now, first of all, a lion, we're talking about a lion and a bear. Like, this dude killed a lion. Now, yeah, you might be thinking, okay, this is a giant and he can't fight no giant, but he fought a lion. He fought a lion though. Like, I can't even, a lion. You know what I'm saying? And you think that he can't go fight this giant? And so that's crazy. Like, I wouldn't be caught, within 100 miles of a lion and then a bear. So that's crazy. To think that he wasn't prepared, or he was not qualified, or he had no experience. He had plenty of experience. He fought a lion and a bear. That's crazy. And so God was preparing him for this exact day. Yes, he was a shepherd boy, but God was preparing him. Because like he said, when the lion attacked the lambs, David fought the lion. He said, a bear came against my sheep and I battled the bear. And so all along, God was preparing David to fight Goliath. And so he was preparing him. And all of his life leading up to that day, David was being prepared. And that's why I said, sometimes you don't recognize that you are being prepared for something. Whatever you're being prepared for, you may not see it today or tomorrow. God may prepare you for something that you may not see for another 10 years or 20 years. You just don't know. But you cannot take for granted anything that you've been through, no matter how good or bad it was, because you just don't know that might be preparation for something later on. And so you have to recognize that. And this is, God prepared him. And so God calls us to be faithful right where we are. And that's why you have to be faithful in those moments. And I know sometimes it's hard. Sometimes we don't want to do things. Sometimes we don't want to be somewhere but let me tell you, if God put you in a place and you hate it and you don't want to be there, but God put you in a place, you need to recognize that I might be here for a reason. Me being here might be preparation for where he wants to take me later on. And so sometimes you got to get out of your head and get out of your feelings and stop complaining about where you are in your life, or if you're in a specific place, or you're in a specific state, or you in a specific job, sometimes you may need to stop complaining about where you at right now, because God maybe just using it to prepare you for something greater later. But you got to recognize that, and that's why God wants us to be faithful where we are, so that he can use our faithfulness to accomplish greater things later on. And so David would have never been ready for Goliath if he wouldn't have been faithful and fought the bear and fought the lion and just let God prepare him for the things and he didn't even know it. And so sometimes you don't know it. You don't know you're being prepared for something else. But he would have never been ready for that giant if he wouldn't have did what he did, if he wouldn't have had those experiences in his life. And so David gave Saul his resume. He said, look, I fought the lion, I fought the bear, I did all these things, man. I'm gonna tell you, I'm ready for this giant. I'm ready. You might look at me, you might look at my size, you don't know what I've been through, and that's why I'm telling you, I'm ready. And so he said, look, the reason why I know I'm ready is because the Lord rescued me from the lion and he rescued me from the bear, and I know without a shadow of a doubt he'll rescue me from this Philistine. So I ain't scared. I'm not worried about it. I'm not scared. I'm not like y'all. I'm not scared because I have experience. I don't know what experience y'all got, but I know I got experience, and I know that God has brought me through some things, and so I know that he'll bring me through this, and I'll be able to kill this giant. And so David, again, David was prepared for this. He was ready for this. And like I said, you never know how God is going to use something. And that's what I want you to take from what I'm saying today is just always be mindful of your situation and what's going around you that God may be preparing you for something. So instead of complaining, you just may need to recognize, okay, what is this for? What is this about, God? And just be faithful with where you are. And so, like David said, the same God who delivered me back then, he's going to deliver me again. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today, man. Just let you know that you can do great things. Things can be turned around for you. And just know that God uses all of your experiences, no matter what you've been through, he uses it all for your good and for his glory. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. And so if you like what you heard today, man, please like it and share it with somebody who you know can benefit from it. And if you have not yet subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so that you can get updated when the new episodes get released. And like I always say, man, let's win in life. And in order to do that, you got to keep a growth state of mind.